Right on, right on, right on. All right. Uh, all right, guys. Welcome back to Wolkes Mysticae. I don't know how to pronounce it all that well, Ike, so I just try to say it really mystical at the beginning of the show every time, because that's what everybody's really tuning in for, is all the hyper mysticism that we're about to talk about.
Right.
But welcome back to the show, everybody. As you know, we don't spend a lot of time talking about theory or history. As much as those things are awesome, there's about a million other podcasts, including our guests today's, where you can go and listen to much higher level theory, much higher level history. Pleased to have you today, man. I'm excited to have this conversation and to get into talking what we love to talk about here, which is practice. How it relates to you, how you have learned to integrate it into like discipline, right? That's one of the things that keeps coming up for me is how do I make sure that my practice itself is disciplined? And how does that, in many ways, embolden or enrich the theory behind it, right? The whole experience of what it is to be an occultist, an esotericist, witch, magician, whatever, all those fancy labels we love to carry around. So I'm pleased to have you, man. Please let the listeners know a little bit about you. I'm pretty sure they already know who you are.
Well, the pleasure is mine. You've been doing some great work. I know that you've what are you, like 5 or 6 in right now with this particular book?
Yes, 6 or 7. I can't remember.
Right. Well, 7 would be a great number. But I like 6.
I think this might be 7.
There you go. See, look at that. Yeah, so I'm just happy to be here with you, and thank you for all the support that you've really heaped on, really, since very close to the beginning of my own work on the Arcanum channel, which, yeah, I mean, I wanted it to be a nice blend of history, theory, and practice. And in I think a year and 10 months or 8 months, we're coming up a year and 9 months. A year and 9 months, I've put together, I think, almost 100 videos between podcasts and documentary style presentations on the history, theory, and practice. I got another one I'm working on, actually. So I did a 2-part series on the history of the Golden Dawn, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which was very well received, actually. Some of my more popular series. So I'm going to be doing and this may sound very boring to people, but the thing is, there are so many layers to this that go completely unaddressed. But I'm going to be covering doing like a 2-part series on the rituals of the pentagram. So
Nice.
Yeah, the history, the theory, how to do it, why we're doing it, and then sort of if you're familiar with the works of Mircea Eliade, really a really deep dive into what the actual ritual is comprised of. What is it doing? And it's certainly much more. There's about 4 or 5 different layers to this. People think it would be either warding or a banishing, but there's actually a lot to it. So that'll be up next. I just released a book. We'll talk about it, I guess, a little later on. It's called A Formless Fire. Again, thanks be to God, very well received. So, but I'm looking forward to getting into, some of the practice we talk about. That's really my main thing. Maybe not a lot of people know that about me if they're new to my channel and some of my work. I talk a lot about the history and theory because we need context in order to know what we're doing. And we also need discipline. That's true too, right? I mean, the etymological root of that word is discipulus in Latin, which means student. So the art of the student is discipline. So yeah, I mean, I have been a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn for nearly a decade now. I am a temple chief of I'm imperator of the Asheville, North Carolina temple of HOGD with the Ciceros.
Nice.
Yeah, practicing Martinist. I am a clergy member of the AGCRC, CRC, the Apostolic Church of the Golden Rosy Cross, and a bunch of other stuff. But basically, the bulk of my life over the past 15 to 20 years has been some form of esoteric praxis. Starting out as humbly as, kind of like we were talking about before, as humbly as yoga and meditation, which really, I mean, meditation is still the skeleton. It's the foundation of my practice, and moving through it to alchemical, theurgic, elemental, celestial magic, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's kind of my bag, and I'm glad that we get to talk about it a little bit more in terms of the practice today.
Yeah, it's one of those things, and that's one of the reasons I started this. Was there's so many people doing great things talking about that high level academic approach, the history, the theory. We need that. We absolutely have to have that, especially in an age of information deluge where there's just this dearth of information. And if you're coming at this from a beginner's perspective, it's overwhelming, right? Where do I go? Who do I go to for the right information? I got this book. For me, it started out early on. As I re-entered the Western tradition, it was the craft for me. It was witchery. It was all of that, because I was a little spooked by some of the Christian iconography that I saw in the Western tradition. And coming from someone who had deconstructed from the church and explored things like Zen Buddhism and Taoism throughout my 20s, when I reemerged into the Western tradition in my 30s, the craft was the easier entry point, so to speak. And so for me, that beginner's mindset that you talk about is so vital, because there is so much information. How do I process it? What do I do with all of it to begin with? Because somebody like me, I'm an Aquarius. I'm hyper intellectual about things. Books are my bag. Like, it's just like, if I'm not either reading, I'm writing. And so for me, how do I process all this information? Where do I go to? There's so much of that already, and people doing it at such a high level that when I started this show, I was like, I want to focus on the discipline aspect, the practice, the methodology behind the rituals and the techniques. Why do we do them? So you're talking about the piece about the pentagram. I've been working through something like that myself, like just a small 10 to 20 page piece about, like, what are we actually doing when we get into this ritual? Because so many people are doing it without any knowledge of the mechanics of it. They're just operating within the idea that it banishes or potentially wards. Will it keep spirits away from me?
Well, and if you read the foundational documents that accompany it, written by the people who created it, right? Founders of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, really calling from Levy's work, and as very Kabbalistic, obviously, they basically say, it's only good for unimportant banishing. It's not a proper ward, It's like...
Yeah, and I think, you see, it's these kind of conversations that need to be had about, like, almost every ritual that we're doing. I remember going into the Golden Dawn tradition and working through that stuff at the beginning and having so many questions about, what am I actually doing when I'm doing the ritual of purification before taking initiation? What am I doing when I'm doing the Q cross? What's actually happening here? And I think in doing the research, like just going online and just typing till my thumbs bleed, I found probably 2 or 3 decent pieces online about what the Q cross even is, or what it's doing for you in that moment. There's some value to having that veiled, I think. Just do it and things will change. You don't need 100%. To get up in your head about it.
100%.
You don't need to, but for some people like me, like I need to know. Like,
well, I think
need to know basis.
I think that you should know. I think at first you don't need to know. One of the interesting things is, like, I'll go on and on. I'll go off on a some tangent. By the way, can I swear?
Yeah, oh, fuck yeah.
Okay, so I'll go off on a fucking tangent, for about 45 minutes, blackout, and I'm talking about all this theory and history and how, it's like this is actually the pentagram was the holiest symbol other than the tetractys to the Pythagoreans. They wore it around their neck, to know each other as a symbol, yada yada yada. There's they call it the penth alpha. It's a perfect triangle, and it's there's the golden ratio. Phi is encoded throughout this goddamn thing. I only know that stuff now. Like a lot of people think you got to like study, and then go and practice. Really, what I did was practice. I studied the mechanics. I what am I supposed to be feeling? What am I supposed to be visualizing? How does this work? You don't need to know. You never have to have encountered a pentagram before in order to be successful at doing the ritual. Like if I've never seen that shape before, so I think that there is actually high value at first. At first, just going in dry, and getting the thing done and doing it until you have some kind of insight. Then what you do is write your insight down, right? Let that develop, let that mature, like a fine wine over time, and and then go little by little. And really, at that point, when you're engaging with a magical current, when you're reaching up, so to speak, there's going to be, not to be too like Deepak Chopra or anything, but there's going to be synchronicities. There's going to be meaningful coincidences that essentially lead you to information about this stuff. And that will really be on a need to know basis, which you need to know this for some reason about how it relates to you. Because that's what we're not doing in magic is we're not hyper concerned with the objective. We are hyper concerned, or I would say focused on the subjective, the relationship, the intimacy to the pneumatic, that we're attempting to cultivate and experience. Otherwise, the telos of magic is gone. You reduce it to, pages in books, and that's not a living tradition.
Yeah, it is that. It's going to be different for everyone too, right? That's one of the things that I found after working through it in temple tradition, and then in solitary. I found Cicero's solitary work afterwards very helpful for me. Once I'd kind of exited the temple and started working through it again with a clearer head for myself, it started to come together for me, and I realized how much of this had to become me and the way that I'm going to do things. And we get so, or at least I see in the community, especially among people just entering this, maybe just a couple of years under their belts, they're doing it with no idea why, especially if they're doing it outside of a group setting. And so that's, again, going back to why I think it's so important that we get people talking about the nitty gritty, the mechanics of this stuff, just in general, and how these talking heads that everybody looks up to, by the way, everybody from the plebs down, there's a hierarchy in occultism. Everybody knows it, but we pick our favorite talking heads and then we talk to all the other plebs about it. Yep. And but there's so many that don't know why they're doing it.
Yeah,
and they don't know where to go to.
I want to be a talking head the same way Orpheus was. He had his head ripped off and stuck on a pike, and it just sung.
That's so awesome.
For the rest
so
of
metal.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it's you kind of took what I was saying earlier, and you said something about being a perpetual student, right? And I think that is very important. I think that's one of the benefits among the many risks of being involved in a community, whether that's an order or a temple. Mind you, all temples have different temple cultures. Just because they're part of a reputable order does not mean that what's going on in the temple is fucking kosher. I'm not trying to pull anyone's pants down here. I'm just saying it's the truth, because we're all human. And like you say, it's got to be very individual to the person. I was in a pretty bad situation early on. I don't want to go into too much detail about it, but I was aware it was a bad situation. But my intuition and various, investigations done by dream work and by divination, etc. I mean, it revealed to me that going through that shitty, harsh situation was a part of my karma. It was part of something that I had to learn to deal with and learn how to eventually learn from, right? Because it's very rare that all situations are absolutely 100% terrible and you don't learn anything, you don't gain anything. I mean, I think that would be the pinnacle of naivete, is to say I didn't learn anything. Well, that's something fucked up with you. That's the case. You don't learn anything from your shitty experience, but I do think that part of being the eternal student is having a teacher. And I mean, I talk about stuff at a very high level, and most of the stuff I'm doing now and have been doing for the past 2 years, I don't talk about, because the operation is still in progress. And you have to. There's something to be said when you're doing stuff. Keep the alembic sealed. Keep it sealed so that you don't fuck up what you're doing. And because it has to, it revolves around its own pressure, its own center of gravity. And I mean, that's a truism in the craft, of Wicca. That's a truism in ceremonial. All forms of magic say you do the ritual, then you walk away, don't talk about it, don't think about it. So that's kind of part of it. But in order to do that work, I found an excellent teacher. Within the really, we just chanced upon each other. I was moving down to Asheville. I called up Tabby and I said, I'm moving to North Carolina. I know there's a temple somewhere around there. Can you put me in touch with them? And she's like, oh, they're in Asheville. Oh, great. And it turned out that this guy, who is also one of the other temple chiefs, is, he's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Human, like the rest of us, but absolutely brilliant. And so I have my teacher that I work with, throughout this stuff. And I strongly believe in perpetual apprenticeship, and there are inner teachers too. And there are literary teachers. I mean, Dion Fortune, I consider her my teacher. I visited her grave in Glastonbury in 2019. And I just broke down, and I wasn't expecting that to happen. And I didn't, I just came flooding into my head all that this person has given me, and they died, like 40 years before I was born. And I had nothing to give them. So I just took off the piece of jewelry I was wearing and I buried it, right on top of her grave. Hopefully it's still there. So it's, there can be a myriad of teachers, but you have to know where you're at, kind of know where you want to go. And then, in humility, you have to submit to the guidance of that teacher using your critical faculties, obviously. But so you can't teach someone what they think they already know.
Yeah. You can't fill a full cup.
Right.
That's a good point. It's funny. I put in the show notes, day one mentality or the beginner's mindset. And that's been vital to me in my praxis. And I think my background in studying Zen is that's the whole of it, is that you are perpetually in practice. You could achieve enlightenment, but you're still going to sit in Zazen afterwards.
And that's funny because that was my first meditation practice. But really my first teacher was, I studied Zazen at a temple in New York, actually.
Yeah, same here in Denver. It was in my early 20s, and I loved that experience, and it's been foundational for me. Like we talked about, meditation's key, it's foundation, and it's my number one teacher above anything else. And that I love how you talked about that, because, man, in our world we're so linear. Society's so linear. Somebody says you got to have a teacher, they immediately go, I have to have a person. That's great to find the right person. Not everybody's going to find the right person,
right?
In that journey. And so they're like you said, they're inner teachers. The people we meet are teachers. From the person that pisses you off at the grocery store, to
Yeah.
cutting you off, there's a teaching moment happening. Your entire life is a teaching moment. And so just kind of reflexively thinking about it as you were talking about it, your number one teacher is always going to be yourself, by allowing yourself to be humble in that experience, to know that I'm not done. I'm not going to be done anytime soon. And there's not a point where I am the master, right? You know, no matter how far I go down this path, I still have shirked the uh, accepting the mantle of responsibility for teaching others. Even upon doing this podcast, I'm like, okay, if I do this, I'm going to be a talking head. And then somebody's going to look up to me. And I'm like, I don't want that fucking pedestal. Did you fucking put me on that pedestal? Because I don't want to be the master. I want myself firmly rooted, because I know myself well enough. I want myself firmly rooted in that humility that I don't know enough yet. And there won't be a point where I know enough to accept something of that nature. And to just be forever curious. You know, it's about, what's that next thing for me? What's the next revelation that's about to come about through my experience? And so that is, like we talked about before the show, discipline. That's my number one discipline, is this beginner's mindset. And I love that we brought that up. How does that work for you? Like, how do you keep yourself firmly rooted in that beginner's mindset?
Well, I would say right around the time that I was thinking about doing this podcast, I was becoming rigid, which means when you become rigid in your thinking, you can't really be a beginner. A beginner is not, a beginner doesn't know what's going on. Sometimes they're too flexible, and if you want to be a beginner, you have the sincerity of a beginner, but you're very rigid. That's not beginner's mindset either. And so a lot of people don't ever really begin, because they haven't allowed themselves the plasticity, the malleability of their own persona, because everything has to change. It's not just you accumulating shit like some kind of cave troll or dragon that you're sitting on secrets like treasure. That's a fool's errand. But I was becoming rigid because I was a teacher in the Golden Dawn system, and I was, talking about all this. I'd been an adept for a couple of years, of the Inner Order, and you just constantly was in this, power differential that is created by knowledge, people coming to an order and seeking some. And so one of the best things that ever happened to me was talking constantly to not just people who know more than me, or have experienced, really, because that's what I value, is the experience. You could know a lot of shit and still be, you could know every one of Plato's dialogues, and if you're still looking at it as a quasi or proto-rationalistic document, you don't have any insight. So what I'm interested in is insight that is applicable to my own experience. But it also it broke me down like heat to a metal, and I became much more flexible, or coming around to ideas that are inherent to things like practical alchemy, that are fundamentally, you don't find necessarily consonant within the interior culture of something like the Golden Dawn. A lot of people will talk about, like, we do alchemy, and there's this spiritual alchemy that's going on. And so the actual culture and the vernacular, the way we talk about alchemy, constantly sort of eludes or precludes the operative aspects. And so I started talking to alchemists, and I'm like, Jesus, there's something serious here, and just a million different examples of stuff like that. Even talking to practitioners of Wicca, that certain cultures will, ceremonialist, quote unquote, high magic will poo on that kind of stuff. And, I've even learned to see the value of perspectives from, say, something like the left-hand path. I don't necessarily have to agree with them. That's the whole thing. People don't realize, like, I would say 90% of the people I have on my podcast, and I've had a lot of people now, I would say I disagree with about 60% of things. My podcast isn't for you to cut. It's not CNN. I'm not bringing you on to sabotage you. It doesn't matter what I think. In that context, it doesn't matter what I think. I'm trying to create a dialogue because people don't fucking talk to people they disagree with anymore. And I want to do, as long as I respect what you're doing, and you're not somebody who completely is going to misinform the audience, then I will talk to you. So that's one way that I stay in the beginner's mindset. The other thing is I seek teachers. I started out very early on as a musician. I've been a musician my whole life, really, and I studied with fantastic teachers. But the key there was the plurality, because my first great teacher, he was a drummer named Dom Famularo. He died actually very recently of cancer. It was a very sad thing, but we had kept in touch. But Dom was, he was a world-renowned guy, and he was, from Long Island like me, so he was accessible. And he told me, he had me studying Spanish as a language, because he was like, if you don't understand the language, if you don't understand the cadence that is ingrained in that culture's method of communication, you will never understand their music. You'll never truly, fluidly be able to settle into those rhythms if you don't understand. Like, he had me, sort of changing my dominant hand. I would write with my left hand. I would brush my teeth with my left hand. I would use my mouse at the time with my left hand. So he had this whole sort of comprehensive approach to making me a beginner constantly, right? Studying new languages, studying new music, doing things I hadn't done before. But one of the things that he told me, and he was my teacher, was like, don't just learn from me. You want to learn, to go to a jazz master, you want to learn jazz. You want to, he was a drummer. So, from that point on, I learned to go and seek the best of the best and learn from as many that would have me, and another thing that's important is, that exchange. What am I giving back to my teachers? It doesn't have to be just in the form of money. We know that. You guys, we're in Malkuth Visaya, so to speak, Kabbalistically. You need money here. We need the pentacles, but the main thing that actually Dom was probably the first to teach me was, if you don't go and teach what you know, give what you know, you dishonor your teachers in a way. So that's another reason why I do what I do. I take my oath seriously. I won't talk about certain rituals. I won't talk about the stuff that is a little higher up that I'm really sworn to keep secret. But at the same time, I looked around and I saw so many beginners doing stuff that they don't realize is dangerous. I hear a lot of people say, the danger's negligible in magic. And I think to myself, well, what the fuck are you doing? Because I'm not, are we doing the same thing? Because I'm pretty sure this can be extremely dangerous, actually, with the whole nefesh and the cycles of the moon and the whole disposition of, the spiritual or magical powers being continually diverted downward into materiality, and how dangerous that is, and how was typically considered, not only in Christian, but in pre-Christian paganisms, that was considered the fall of the soul, the routing down of what we call the nefesh towards earth, towards Hylia. That is original sin, which is the first mistake. And so in magic, what you're trying to do is volatilize that. And if you don't have a firm grasp on what triggers you sexually, or let's say in terms of addictions, or in terms of very, very strong emotions, they're going to run the fuck amok and pretend that they're the captain of the ship. And you're going to, so there is absolutely a certain danger that's involved. So, and that's another important thing that you should learn from a teacher.
There's a lot of good stuff there, man. I'm not even sure where to go with that, but I was thinking about.
Sorry.
No, it's good. I want to touch more on the danger of it in a little bit here. But something that you said, it resembled vulnerability, right? In those moments where you're in discourse with somebody, you're being taught. You have to assume a sense of vulnerability in order to expand your paradigm, right? So more often than not, we come to, and I'm speaking we as in just society now, we come to a moment where two people are about to exchange ideas. And it is a little bit like the Greeks and the Trojans. It's like we're here to exchange ideas, but they feel a lot more like arrows, right? And so everybody's worldview is very tight butthole, if you will. They're not willing to accept the idea that potentially something that they have within their experience right now is incorrect. Maybe not incorrect from an objective level, but there's something to be gained or learned from. And you talked about how you don't agree with potentially 60% of the people you have on your show. Those are such fabulous teaching moments, right? We grow by engaging in discourse with people who think differently than us, not by engaging in discourse with people who think exactly like us. That's how we create echo chambers. That's what we've done in society to this point. And growth is supposed to be uncomfortable. It's by its very nature uncomfortable because there's an uncertainty, there's an insecurity, there's an unknown about where I'm going in this process. And for me, that had to turn that emotional trigger on its head. So that when I got to an uncomfortable position, I wasn't seeking to avert it or to move away from it, but to move through it and to accept that this is going to be uncomfortable for the time being. But on the other side of that portal is something that is of value to me, to my experience, where I need to go in this process. And that, I think, is so vital. You know, I see it so often in the community online. It's a desire for escape from the discomfort, a desire for escape from either this world through magic or through their circumstance through magic. When more often than not, the portal is right through that discomfort. Like, no, you got to lean into that. You got to push deeper into whatever that is in order for that to reveal what is on the other side. You can't run from it. There is no running from it with magic. At least there hasn't been in my experience. Anytime that
I mean, you'll think that you're running from it, and what happens is you're running straight into its arms. And the speed at which you are moving will be directly proportionate to how hard you hit this fucking thing.
It's true. It's so true. The thing about it is it's discipline to be in a state of discomfort. Like, I think there's cycles. So for me, in engaging in discipline, I have my dailies. I keep them as simple as possible because we live in a world that's go, go, go. We have responsibilities. We have things within the mundane. And of course, I use the mundane just as a marker for people. Everything now is magical for me. There's no such thing as mundane for me anymore. But the dailies I keep super simple. And then when it comes time to do something more, I'll go through cycles. Like the time of September through October for me, and moving in through the winter is a very busy time when it comes to ritual. Summer, I kind of just let it go. Like I don't do much in the summer. I try to follow a little bit more of a natural rhythm. Maybe it's the druid background. Like there's much more time for me to be ritually ensconced in the dark periods of the year. That's when I'm really getting into it. And then I let it breathe. And then I move through that discomfort and maybe find a little bit of solace, that kind of like in between area, that liminal space before it becomes uncomfortable again. But I think that discomfort is so vital to the beginner's mindset. I think that's just where I'm going to leave that for now.
Yeah. I mean, and that's a lot of, I think, what being a magician is about, right? Is personifying personifying the ideas or state that is symbolized or associated with the symbol of the circumpunct, right? The symbol of the sun is being the hub at the center. And while the periphery revolves, the hub appears still, and so, that is how ultimately you are able to wield the forces, it's something like that actually has for me its strongest or most immediate implications in something like elemental magic, which is what you and I were kind of talking about before we got on a call. We were talking about elemental magic, and as somebody that practices and to some degree attempts to reconstruct ceremonial theurgy of the, I would say, Hellenistic or Hellenist Greco-Egyptian Roman period, I think a lot of people nowadays would be like, well, where the hell does elemental magic come into play? Isn't that more for Wicca? Isn't that more for nature-based stuff? And I would say, well, theurgy is nature-based. I mean, everything we're doing is we participate first here in the material. Our locus of perspective, right? That's really the significance behind what most people would call the geocentric model, right? That most magicians utilize, whether you're in, it doesn't matter what section of the traditions you're involved in, utilizing this basically Ptolemaic model for your correspondences, for your relationships, not because we think that the earth is the center of the universe, but that we occupy a space that is georeferential.
Where we are.
Yes, exactly. It's very, and that's what I'm talking about, the primacy on the subjective. I am in this body in North Carolina on planet Earth, and I'm working my way, I'm working through what I guess in the Golden Dawn tradition you would call the magical mirror of the universe. That 360 degree omnidirectional view you have from inside what we call your sphere of sensation, or really is a Western kind of term for aura. You're looking out at the world. Well, that's your magical mirror. And so, that positions you in the center. And you have to learn how to not necessarily be reactive all the time, right? The state of constant habituated reactivity is really what diverts all your forces downward, spends it, grounds the energy instead of, sublimating and directing it. And a lot of that has to do with fear. A lot of that has to do with anxiety. And the processes, particularly of natural magic, are meant to be an elemental alchemy, or I should say, they should correspond to the elemental self of the microcosm. And as you work through the elements, and as you learn to understand the elements, and you become more intimately familiar with these processes and these substances and the way that they work, because they connect to the higher, that change will happen in you as well. And I think that equilibration is super important to remaining able. I'm not saying all the time I'm this still center. If you are sitting in my passenger seat when I'm in traffic, you'd have no idea that I have done decades of spiritual work a lot of the time.
It's our continued work there. That's an opportunity every time for me as well.
Everyone's in process, so to a degree. But elemental magic is something that I have, gone back to recently. I never step away from it entirely, right? Because you can't. In magic, it's a threefold system: the natural world, the celestial world, and the divine world. And it's all the part of the same continuum. But, and a lot of people that there's a huge interest in celestial magic right now. And it's like, celestial magic is predicated on this idea of signatures, right? Agrippa calls it sigillum. Iamblichus calls it synthemata. Well, how the fuck are you going to know which planets correspond to what if you don't know intimately the materials that you're working with? I mean, your first study should be in natural magic in order to be able to more effectively operate that celestial switchboard of which virtues do I want to hone in on? How do I want to sort of play this quote unquote planetary scale? So yeah, I mean, there's lots of different advantages to really, really being good at that, revisiting and really, really saturating yourself thoroughly in that foundational area of magic.
That's a fantastic point. That every year, what I try to do is put myself back into beginner's mode. And it's like, that's what I tell you. Like, this time of year is when I start thinking, I start writing stuff down again. Okay, this year's done, because I tend to follow like around October's when the year ends for me. There's just something about that time that feels so final, and it maps pretty well to what the Egyptians were doing. And it's pretty close to what the Greek calendar was like. We just kind of passed it in the Greek calendar, at least what we've reconstructed of it, right? The New Year's around this time, and we still do it around January. A lot of people, new year, new me. And so I'll go back to the drawing board, get back to the basics. Okay, what did I really suck at this year? What do I need to focus on? And elemental magic is a great starting point, or at least a good framework to plug all this in. Like, okay, where am I out of tune with fire? Where am I out of step with air? Am I not grounded enough? Am I too much into a water element? How am I behaving in the world? Those are things that I'll start journaling about, and I'll be like using those as a place to orient myself, right? It's directional. And you're right on when you're talking about celestial being so popular right now. And yet you see people working with all these things, but there's no grounding in reality. They're floating. They're just floating in the air, talking to all these different celestial beings, or supposedly, with no firm foundation and no feet on the ground. And it just produces the same thing that we see happen in society anyways. There's all of this stimulus that we have in society. We're constantly bombarded with stimulus. And what you see in people from a physiological perspective is you have like your nervous system's hijacked, essentially, with cortisol, with everything else. You're completely spracked out, and you're just moving in whatever direction, just grasping at straws. The same thing happens in magic as well. If you get too up here, overstimulated, with no way to ground it, no way to keep yourself somewhere firmly rooted as the nexus of that hub, as you're talking about, you're in a lot of trouble, because that's a lot of energy to start pouring through your body. And that goes back to the dangers you're talking about. I think it's so vital. So my question to you is what does that working look like? How do you correspond this elemental map to a daily praxis? What is it that you do, if you're willing to share?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I assumed, we talked about how we were going to talk, your show's oriented towards practice. So a lot of it will be, I have to sequence things. So I have to basically say, okay, otherwise I feel like I'm wasting my time, right? It's like going to the gym, like, I don't know, and doing a completely different thing every week. It's like, this week I'm trying to put on muscle, but the next week I'm trying to, I'm doing cardio, which also burns muscle, and I'm not, I'm switching gears too much, and they're kind of working against each other. Mm-hmm. The whole idea for me is really in, elemental alchemical magic and things of that nature. There's a sympathy between the microcosm and the macrocosm, or the operator and the material. And the goal is to allow the operator to have enough spiritual primacy, have enough what I would call, for lack of a better term, equilibration, and holding the bridles of their own elemental nature, rather than being dominated by those forces.
Authority.
Right. Authority, spiritual authority particularly, is, that is going to allow me to use, to command these forces and use them with wisdom, right? Rather than doing things like, okay, I'm doing a bit of money magic and having it backfire, like, oh, I made the whatever it is X amount of money, but my house burnt down, and that kind of stuff. So again, there's consequences. Just kind of that sort of sympathy. So that's the way I approach it. I approach it from the level of, okay, I'm working with these materials, and there's a relationship to my microcosm, my self, essentially. And so what I will do is I will basically say, okay, I'm going to devote the course of 12 months, so a year, and I'm going to, go in 4 cycles of 3 months, and I'm going to work my way. Okay, I'm working with elemental earth, then I'm working with elemental air, working with elemental water, and then elemental fire. And I structure that based on, this sort of elemental square of opposition, right? Like you're saying, earth precedes air because those two temper each other, right? That the root of the word temperance, learning that middle path, and what that will consist of for me is obviously study, right? Learning, working out of Kyrianides and other certain forms of collected lapidaries. I work a lot from Agrippa. I think everything is in Agrippa. It's not perfect, right? His Latin's not perfect, but if you're looking for any kind of magic, it's in Agrippa, really. He covers all of it, and he does so very, very well, systematically. Working with Culpepper's herbal is something that I'm big into, and I'm a gardener, and my fiance, like we're both gardeners. We enjoy
local
that
flora.
Yeah, absolutely. You gotta know. It's like, I don't care what's growing in Egypt and Greece right now. It has nothing to do with me. I'm learning the local flora. Exactly.
I can't do the magic without the mandrake root. Okay.
Right. Well, then that's exactly why the Golden Dawn pioneered color magic, so that you wouldn't have to wake up at 3:30 in the morning and travel on foot, to get to prepare a switch of hazel, yeah, it's an obsolete form of magic. I mean, go ahead, do it. I'm sure it's powerful, but you don't have to. There are other options. But one of the things that I do is elemental invocation. So calling into, using the spiritual hierarchies, particularly the ones that have been codified by the Golden Dawn. I find that they work excellently for me. I will arrange the elemental, really, in my system, my tools, my elemental tools, that have been consecrated, that have been made by me by hand and consecrated, to be the equilibrated forces of my microcosm, right? That have been osirified, taken apart through ritual initiation, strengthened. I've strengthened the weak. I've purified or balanced out the strong, and I recombined them at the, that is the trajectory of the outer order of the Golden Dawn, for anybody that isn't aware. So I reenact this, and I'm using my elemental tools, because you should never work one element without the other, right? Agrippa talks about that, and not even just Agrippa. It's a truism even in astrological magic. What we really talk about is how everything here is mixed. So the best that you can do is bring one particular element to the fore. You can never completely isolate a compound element here, in a magical context, or very rarely can you do that without altering its physical substance. And that's something that Agrippa says, right? Agrippa says, if you are able to render the impure into purity, we're not talking about moral connotations. We're talking about something that is mixed. If you're able to do that, if you're able to make the complex simple without disturbing its physical substance, then you will be able to work wonders. That is the work of magic. I think he says that in like chapter 4 of the first book, or 5, or something like that. So that's essentially what I work with. I work with the elemental tools, and then I bring in various forms of synthemata, various ritual accoutrement. again, it's a truism in celestial magic. You want to work with a particular planet, there needs to be those colors. There needs to be a certain fabric of the, or at least the color of the regalia. There needs to be a particular stone or plant or elixir or something that corresponds to this particular element. And then, you know, moving into celestial magic, something that corresponds to that, I would say hierarchy of occult virtue, somewhere along that. And that essentially serves, right, as, if you're familiar with music, it serves as the tonic, the root note of the scale. I'm starting at, let's just say, completely arbitrary, right? But for musicians, pretty simple. Starting at middle C, right? I'm at middle C. That's my whatever, my, you know, my sapphire. And I'm going to play the blue ray, the Jupiterian correspondences of the occult ladder of virtues. So I need to find that root note. That is the most available thing to me. It is the most immediate expression or permutation of that. It is my easiest access point to begin to play that occult scale, like a piano scale or like a you know, musical scale. So that familiarizing myself with those properties. Now, the second thing that I do, other than the elemental invocations and spending time in nature, in the physical body, you know, bringing my mind to those things of physical health, finances, stability, job, all that kind of stuff. Let's say for elemental earth, I sit with various materia, and I practice a kind of theoria, right? Meditative. Now, what's something that I find very, very interesting in the work of, say, somebody like David Chaim Smith, who's a very good friend of mine, he talks about this idea of, you know, phenomena being habituated conceptuality. And that in reality, when you kind of remove conceptuality, if you're able to get rid of that habit over a very prolonged period, and even David admits that he doesn't yet have stable realization of this kind. But even for somebody like me who approaches these things magically, right, we use conceptuality. We use this phenomena. I can benefit from that mentality by sort of encountering things as textured fields. Now, I don't know how coherent that might sound to somebody, but one of the ways that I approach this is I sit with the material and I go into, firstly, a meditative sort of state. I scan then the emotional, the astral etheric body, see what I'm feeling, register these things. I attempt to connect with this, and then I enter into vision. It's a type of scry, with this, and commune with the various.
It's a dialogue.
It is exactly what it's a relationship.
You have to get quiet enough in order to hear the message, and I think that's what's missing in most people's ideal or their practice of that, right? Simply sitting with something, and I think this comes from Druidry, true. I will sit with a plant, like literally just sit there outside, observe it. What is it doing through its life cycle? What does it look like as a sprout? What insight do I get from just simply being with it? You know, I don't do it too often in a ritual context where I get all my regalia together and I sit with it in my temple space. Nature is a temple for me more often than not, but just as with plants, like in the garden, you can go sit as simply as possible. Go outside and sit with the materia, with the rock. The temple's already there, right? But yeah, I think it is that dialogue. So thank you for laying that out.
Yeah, and I mean, like, to your point, I will sit in some form of regalia a lot of times because that's how I'm comfortable meditating and doing this.
That's great.
But to your point, going outside, gardening, right? Working with stones to, you know, like, for instance, we've got a lot of water here. We've got a tremendous amount of water. It's a very moist environment. So one of the things that I'll do is I'll use Josephine McCarthy's elemental spread of the land. That's how she kind of scans to see. She uses the tarot to see where the elements are out of balance It's kind of shamanic because this is like
Yep.
like a feng shui of the land, but Western, and then addressing those problems with either offerings or what have you, elemental remediation. One of the things that I'll do is I'll use certain stones to move the water, and assist the land in doing that, working with the stones, aiding drainage to keep things alive. Another thing is, working with plants and things like that, constantly growing things. When you begin to work with a plant, type of plant, in a genus and a species and a family and all that stuff, and you grow it like we do here from seed, and then you cultivate it and you respectfully prune it and you respectfully, take its fruit, and then you give something back to the land that gave to you. You're forming a relationship with the spirit of this plant, that you are essentially acting right in the capacity to which human beings are uniquely poised, by way of our, sort of, this is the best way to use sophisticated self-awareness and intelligence, is to be a cultivator, a steward of the land, and a sister of the natural processes. Very alchemical, right? And nature's going to do this shit by itself, but I can help, and I can do it. I can expedite the process. I can help it perfect itself and have a mutually beneficial relationship. That is magic. The universe truly is a temple.
Yeah, you're imitating the demiurge in those moments.
Absolutely.
It's a theurgical process, right? Gardening is. And so often I love talking about this because we miss the forest for the trees so much in occultism. We're trying to emulate stuff that's already available. Stick, rock, cup. Go to a river with a stick and a rock and breathe. Boom, you're doing magic. You really are. And it's a matter of removing yourself so that potential experience can fill you with the insight that you need in that moment in order to cultivate yourself. Cultivating a garden is cultivating your own mind at the same time. Like it really is. It's a matter of patience. And I've entered into a really strange, because I'm in an urban spot here. I don't have a lot of land to play with for gardening. So what I'll often do is just do a lot of wildflowers, let the bees come, and see what pops up. I won't even fight the weeds anymore because there's something to learn from the weeds too. Yeah. If I do the wildflowers and then I try to fight the weeds, I end up killing both. And I'm like, this just isn't working for me. So I need to be a little bit more patient with the process. I put the seeds there and I wait and I watch and I see what I can learn from it that year. What, oddly enough, is that nature's going to speak to you. Like, for instance, I had all this bindweed come in. I'd never been here in the years that I'd been here. Took over the garden. A year later, I'm working with Dionysus. Like, it was a message that, hey, Dionysus is coming.
Yeah.
You better get ready.
Well, and that's a truism too. Again, in alchemy and in natural magic, is that the shit that's growing around you is like, hey, you need this. You might not realize it, you might not know why, but you need us. That's why we're here. So but the magician is somebody, I think, who is able to straddle the line between being strictly intuitive and then also being intellectually selective. So in other words, somebody that's trained in forms of magic will be able to go to a river instead of just opening up. And there may be various types of nature spirits that are around that can just enter. Well, I know how. I have methodology. I have technique of tuning into this specific field. I can tune into, what we would call elemental water. Speak to allow the water elementals, the undines, and the nymphs and water spirits, that whole hierarchy, that family of intelligences, to speak to me. So essentially, I'm not just kind of going in and winging it. And I think that that's a great place to start. And you can stay there. You can have a great time and do that. I'm more interested in being able to like I said, kind of consciously being able to tap into these textural fields, because everything really is consciousness, and it's a spectrum of consciousness, and we talk about, okay, well, what is it? Is it spirits? Is it energy? Well, it's both. Right? Because the whole thing is that the spirits don't manifest themselves physically like I do. You know what I'm saying? You could see them, you could scry them, you could see them in incense, using fluid condensers. You could even have I've had lots of two-dimensional appearances, physic in the room. At the end of the day, they're not flesh and blood like me. So what we're really doing, David Rankine puts it very eloquently when he says, these are what he calls astral gateway images. They're agreed upon images so that an intelligent energy can communicate to me. So it's both. It's a spectrum of intelligence. Now, magicians tune in to a specific band on that frequency, and we use these astral images to communicate with them, and they're very effective when you learn how to communicate to a very specific section of that.
It's just like tuning an instrument, right? Going back to the musician thing, I'm new to the musical craft, but tuning a string, there's a sweet spot, right? And that's what the magician is interested in, is where's my sweet spot? Where is that? Boom, now I'm in D. That's exactly where I need to be in order to strike this note. And it's a tension, right? It's a tension between you on this point of the string and that intelligent energy on the other end of the string. Where do I twist and turn until when I strike that, the music of the spheres hits, right? That's that moment. And music has been really just a process of tuning strings on a guitar is so magical in and of itself. Just that process. It's like, that's what I've been doing this whole time. It's like a new level of awareness of it.
Like, yeah, me, I mean, hey,
I'm like, holy shit.
Try tuning drums to notes. That's that was an art. Yet. That was an art. I don't even know if I'm there still. But music, well, this is why music traditionally, particularly in something that's, as obvious as the Pythagorean tradition, was sacred. Tuning a string, playing a monochord is according to the legend of how Pythagoras discovered ratio. That's how he found out a mathematical seemingly magical, really in truth, magical truth about reality, about harmony, about dissonance. It's the foundation of it is mathematical. It's ratio. All harmony is boiled down to an idea of ratio. And he did that with a single string, according to so yeah, I mean, music is one of the best teachers for it. It prepares the way for being able to be an extremely successful magician. And a lot of my favorite, people to talk to, and a lot of, the most, I would say, knowledgeable and successful magicians that I know were musicians first.
Well, the discipline required in order to learn an instrument or to learn music in general is akin to what we're doing within the magical construct as well. You have to spend hours learning how to strum, or to, any instrument. It's those rudimentary things that you're doing at the beginning, and you're doing them ad nauseum, and you're like, God, this is so boring. I want to get to the other stuff. But you absolutely have to have that foundation in order to go to that next level, in order to start using that. And I don't see it happening in the community at the, when people are coming in, they want to jump to that next level. And I get the excitement. I understand the excitement. I was there too, but you have to put in the man hours. You have to put in the boring hours where you're sitting and you're just being with yourself. The hard work, right? Because all that stuff that comes after doesn't manifest itself if you don't do that hard work.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is something that I try to shine a spotlight on, is the idea of successive training, progressive trajectory in magic. One of the things in music is, I've been playing in a band now for 3 months. I've been taking lessons for 2 weeks. Let's go play a show. And you play and you suck and you're mortified and humiliated. And we're like, we got to go back to the drawing board. I got to practice more. In magic, it's a little different. You can have that experience, but you can also, like, when you really try to, like, maybe do like a conjuration or something like that, again, there are much more severe risks that can be involved. On the other hand, my first forays into planetary magic just practicing, not just practicing what I was going to do, had like real world results that I was not anticipating. So in that sense, it can be very encouraging. But again, I knew what I was doing, right? Because I'm sitting there practicing, I'm exercising discipline. But yeah, it's a little different because there's a little bit more at stake, I think, than just your pride when you jump into higher level work. I mean, because essentially what the magician has to remember is no matter how skilled they are, no matter how trained they are, you're almost continually at a disadvantage because we cannot physically see 100%. We cannot always, beyond the shadow of a doubt, verify entirely that what we're working with is what it's claiming to be.
Yeah. That's, I think for me, it goes to one of the other points that we were thinking of talking about is devotion. There's a religious side to a lot of this. And I know a lot of magicians will divorce that topic when talking about these things online. But for me, it's developing a relationship with the spirits I'm going to work with beforehand. It's really sitting down and putting in the discipline and the devotion, the offerings, getting to know them, reading about them, performing hymns, these sorts of things, so I can at least get as close as possible to knowing that once I step into the arena, I know who I'm working with. I've developed a rapport, right? I've put in the man hours with Aphrodite or with Hermes, whoever I'm going to be working with on whatever scale, that once I step into that, I don't have to worry as much, right? Sure, there could be an interlocutor here or there, some interloper who wants to tag along. Fine. I know that 96% of what I'm working with in this case is this. And that devotional practice, that religious aspect, that faith, not only in a spirit, right, but within yourself, that I'm going to be able to intuit in some way or produce the right methodology to verify that I'm working with the right thing at that time, I think has been helpful for me. I don't know how that works out for you, but that devotion in and of itself is, it's bolstering to the discipline, right? It helps me shore up the weak spots in my own field of experience once I step into that arena.
Yeah, and I mean, devotion is, you can't really have devotion without humility as well. Otherwise, it's not really true devotion. I, on the other hand, I've tried to form working relationships with certain deities and their I guess, corresponding spiritual hierarchies and things like that. But what I would say devotion, right? My bhakti would be obviously, it's probably not something that you encounter very often in these communities. In fact, I tell people and they kind of look at me like I've got lots of different heads, but and maybe I do, but I am a Christian. So what I would say I'm much more along the lines of a Gnostic. I was raised Roman Catholic. Like every other 15-year-old, I rejected it completely. I went to the antithesis of it and became interested in things like Satanism for a little while. Is part of like what they call therapeutic blasphemy. But at the end of the day, I was really through magic. It was revealed that there is something here that even, that a lot of the mainstream institutions associated with it have no fucking clue what it is. And it just devolves into another locus of power and manipulation. And how do we get a bunch of people to give us a bunch of money and and be afraid of us? But I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think I'm smarter than that. I ended up being called, right? The word vocation. I ended up being called back to the emblem of Christ. Because what it does for me is it makes the impersonal God personal. And so even when I'm working with deities and things like that, it's more of on like, okay, we're gonna have a working relationship, and I'm going to, we're gonna start a conversation, and begin this relationship, and I'm going to, yeah, absolutely, if like when you go to a certain let's say you're working in an office. I'm going to go in my suit and tie because that's what's expected of me in this working relationship. If I work at a bar, I'm going to go in my black button down. That's just, I got to wear my Skechers or my Crocs or something. It's just what's required of me. But ultimately, my devotion is more Christian in nature because it allows me to essentially, what I have found is that it allows me to circumvent working with, let's put it this way, right? When a white light, I'm not talking about pixelation. I'm not talking about pigment. I'm talking about light. Light is different necessarily than color, right? If you mix all the colors together, they make black with a paintbrush. But in light, all the colors are in white. So you can work with this spectrum, selecting this broad band of color, or you can go straight to the white light and have access to all of them sort of on the other side of the prism, right? Yep. And that's even, if you work Kabbalistic magic, dot, for all intents and purposes, is that prism. You have the supernal triad, which is essentially the polarity that's created by the white light, and then the rest, the lower seven Sephirot, the Ruach and all that, Nefesh and Guf, that's the spectrum of color. So my devotion is toward Christianity because it allows me access to I would say the source of these things, and it allows me to see the divinity behind them while simultaneously working with the various faces, or as Campbell might put it, the masks of God.
Yeah, that part is the theater, right? It's all the theater. Well, it's all in one case. I like to think of it as the whole idea of the Maya, right? It's all a grand illusion, a grand spectacle. The idea of me working with X deity or X spirit is really an interplay being viewed by something much higher in that case. And so, yeah, I like that. I like that you utilize that and have found that method for yourself. I think that ultimately that's what we're all aiming for in devotion. And that devotion, it has a spectrum as well. You can devote it any which direction along that spectrum. But like you said, if you point it that way, you do get kind of all at the same time. It's like, what do I want to do in the case of this particular ritual? What do I need to work with? Do I need to work with all? Proclus says that all is within all in different mixtures. So it's almost like those are just the dials, right? Well, if I need to work with blue, I'm working with this deity. If I need to work with green, I'm working with this deity. That's the fine-tuning mechanism, right? That's your set of dials. Or master control. Boom.
Yeah. Well, that's the interesting thing, because what I've found is that the divestiture of the entrenched or ensconced persona allows you kind of a backstage pass. So in other words, I could put on I could be the priest with the mask of, Horus or Set or something, and then meet the divine's mask of the same stripe, the same band, or I could kind of circumvent all that and, instead of working upward, so to speak, if we want to use an analogy of verticality, I'm now working downward. So I'm able to more direct my forces where I want them to go, rather than impelling them, begging them to come to me. So that's what I have found interesting. But the thing is, I think that there's many different ways to do that, but also my magic has a quintessentially, no pun intended, but a theurgic aspect to it, and I think that that's not the case for everyone, and that's fine. I'm more interested in, but to be 100% honest with you, I don't do money magic. I don't do a lot of mundane stuff. My praxis is being in the world, being a steward of the earth, and learning to again, I'm forced to use an analogy, right? It's a convention of speech, but really to work the theurgic sort of elevation. And that's, that doesn't make me the grand high poobah and some enlightened being that now has to, for some reason, I have to start wearing mala beads and fucking meditation robe,
Well,
going to the grocery store.
yeah.
But but just it's for me,
The idea that those things are polar opposites, whether you're working a thaumaturgical ritual or something theurgical, I tend to divorce that from my thinking at most times. In many ways, something that could be considered directed downward or for the manifestation of something like that is often a further portal for me to be working upward. Like there's something in that process that I need to experience in order to raise myself to another layer or level. And so I tend to not think of them as polar opposites anymore. It just wasn't helpful for me. It's kind of like the left hand, right hand path. It's like, what are we wasting our time labeling this for?
Right. Well, that's the thing. I'd like to think that I operate a middle pillar path, a middle, a central path that avails itself of both hands, depending on, aces in place.
Like Cyprian.
Exactly. Like what's exactly right.
Right hand or black hand, white hand.
Exactly. That's the whole thing. Patron saint of Christian magicians, really. but what is needed? What is required? But the thing for me is and it's, you see it, you really see it. Sometimes you can see it in the work of like Jake Stratton Kent and others. If you put a traditional theurgist in the same room, or like, and you're behind like a two-way mirror or something, and then on this side of the partition, you've got somebody that's doing a goetic conjuration. They would appear to be doing the same thing. It's the same technology. It's the same forces they're working with. I think the difference is just in intent. What are they trying to accomplish? And that's going to be very personal for everybody. So,
man. So I don't want to steal a ton more of your time, Mike, because we're having so much fun. But I want to get into talking about your book, about A Formless Fire. I have not had the opportunity to read it yet. So I want you to give me the 411 on what's going on. I mean, I know what I've read from what you've posted and all the great things that have been said about the book already, but what drove you to write it? Like what was the impetus that drove you forward, that instigated you into this?
I would say that the chief instigator of my life at this point has been Jamie Lamb. He's just like, hey, have you ever thought about writing? Have you ever thought about making a YouTube channel? Hey, have you ever done a podcast before? So he's a great he's been in my corner since the very beginning. I like to tell people you would, without Jamie, you'd have no idea who Ike was. So he really, he pushed me a lot to, not excessively, but, contemplate this idea and sort of presenting my thoughts and my experience and the things that my collected research with insight to the community. And so, which he has done himself several times now. He's written loads of books, and he's got another great one coming out on the magic of the Shimhamfaresh and things like that. So, he was instrumental, but I think after I decided, okay, you know what, maybe I'll kind of think about this and bend to the prompting here a little bit, contemplate it. It really was to, I thought of myself, and I thought of many, really the best archetype that pulled me forward to visualize, who am I writing this for? What was the beginner? I thought of where I was at in the beginning. I thought of even some people that in communities I'm involved in are still somewhat skeptical of magic, right? Like Freemason. I'm a Freemason. I'm very active, in those communities. I love Freemasonry. But a lot of the brothers in it are not necessarily, they give a shit about magic, or they're scratching their heads and not sure what we're talking about when we talk about alchemy or the Western esoteric traditions. So part of it was to inform people like that. I'm not just saying Masons, but there they're like a really exemplary cross section of like, while I hear a lot about this, I'm participating in something which claims to be in this tradition historically. What is it? And so I tried the best I could to write a book on the history, theory, and practice of what I would call, again, I make a little bit more of a distinction, but I understand that I have to use, in order to talk about stuff, you have to contrast, right?
Yeah.
Plato did it too. Plato wanted people to know what philosophy was. So how did he do that? He contrasted it against sophistry. That when he beats you over the head about rhetoric and sophistries, what he's trying to do is he's trying to paint a really good picture of philosophy for you, how it's different. So I highlight what I consider to be the theurgic aspects of the tradition and how really that has been what has moved things forward. Because you have a lot of other stuff going on, but that's, everything comes to us from the Golden Dawn. Like, nobody would really give a shit about any of this stuff if the Golden Dawn didn't happen in the 1880s. It wouldn't have collected a cross-section of the entirety of the Western traditions of magic, Solomonic, Goetic, theurgic, but the central, the telos, the purpose of Golden Dawn magic was specifically theurgic. And that's referenced in the writings of the founders in the documents known as the Flying Rolls. They say it many, many times. The reason for which you have been obligated and initiated into this order for the purposes of enacting what we call the divine theurgy. Okay, so I wanted to highlight how that aspect of the tradition, which we now call ceremonial magic, has come through time from about, the last few centuries BCE to, about the 5th or 6th century CE, moved through the Middle Ages, moved through the Renaissance, culminating in something like a new form of magic, like the Arbitel, and how that was very hermetic, and Rosicrucianism by way of, Trithemius, who taught these doctrines to Agrippa and Paracelsus, and then it moves through. I go through everything, that I possibly could in 400 some odd pages, 138,000 words. The history of this stuff, but also the theory behind things like, some working models, right? I mean, after all, we call these the mysteries for a reason. So I don't go all Thomas Aquinas about this shit. Like, I can definitely, this is science. It's not scientific entirely. But some theories about how, probably the best theories about how things like tarot work, how things like intuition, the difference between divination, oracle, and prophecy, Agrippa's scheme of celestial magic, and how that really was a reconstruction of Iamblichus's theurgy. And then also I go into, there's a series of appendices at the back of the book where I will talk about, okay, here's a ritual formula for the consecration of salt and water. I worked with Daniel Wiseman, an extremely knowledgeable and successful alchemist, on creating a recipe for how would one go about making a spagyric tincture of mercury. So there's that in there. You get directions. I teach you the middle pillar exercise and the lesser ritual of the pentagram, but it has my commentary along with this stuff. So there's a lot of practical stuff as well. So history, theory, and practice. I go about until maybe like right before the First World War. And I talk a little bit about at the end about how these things get filtered through, and they become very, very politically identified, which essentially whitewashes them. You lose a lot of the telos of why this stuff, you lose a lot of the magical worldview that was necessary for understanding and practicing this stuff successfully in a time where things began to be overly politicized, identified politically, and changed for somewhat, right, socio-political ideological reasons. And then I end with an afterword that's basically where do we go from here? What is a living tradition? How do we keep this stuff alive? And how do we connect? How do we use this stuff to connect with, some form of spiritual guidance in what will probably be viewed, I don't know, but probably be viewed as somewhat of a dark time in the history of the world.
That's necessary too. I think there's a couple of really key pieces there for me. This idea it's been on my mind a lot lately too, is trying to operate within these structures without having a magical worldview is where people falter. You enter into this, and we can't help it because we are steeped in materialism and consumerism, which are antithetical to the process. And so we have to wash that out. We have to clear that and afford ourselves an opportunity to have a magical worldview. You can only get that through the digestion of that older material, understanding the lineage, where it comes from, understanding how they thought. And that comes through painstaking reading. Unfortunately, for all the people who are averse to reading books at this time, which seems to be more and more common, do you have it in a video format? I hear all the time. No, pick up a book, read the damn book. So I'm very passionate about that because, like,
I like that.
There's something you can't get out of a video. There's an impersonal nature to it. There is a magic within a book. You can read a book multiple times and get different things out of it. I don't think the same thing's possible out of a video or even an audio track. Yep. In certain cases. And to supply yourself with that magical worldview takes hours upon hours upon hours of reading.
Yeah.
Like, I remember the first time I read Papus or Papus. I'm like, what the hell am I reading here? He's breaking my brain. And it literally was that until I started to understand the language. It's the same thing with the Iamblichus, like reading it, or even Crowley. When you're reading Crowley the first time, since everybody's interested in reading him for some reason, it takes reps. It literally takes reps.
Yeah.
And that's what supplies the worldview, and it reconfigures or recalibrates your brain so that once you get into the ritual, these things can happen for you. Because if you're operating from the operating system of consumerism and materialism, this shit doesn't work as well. It'll still work. It won't work as well.
Yeah.
And it won't produce the inner changes that you need. You've got to have that in order for that final catalyst to make things happen for you. And so I think having another book in there that it sounds a lot like a couple that I've really loved over the years. Have you ever read The Secret Teachings of not of Manly P. Hall's? God, what is it? I'll have to look it up. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it goes through that. And another one that was The Encyclopedia of the Occult by Greer.
Yeah, well, so that was a really interesting counterpoint. You'll find that in the bibliography, because he gives the format of that book is kind of like those old books that I used to buy when I was a kid, the National Geographic Atlas of History, and it's like one page dedicated to this certain point. So he's able to, now that he's got everything condensed to the main bullet points or vignettes about this particular era on a single page, he can be really, really thorough. And even then, if he were to be completely exhaustive, we're looking at like 1,000-page book. But I use that to kind of say, okay, here's a good timeline. What is essential? So I actually, I leaned on that book a little bit to say, what here can I not leave out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's important to know that lineage too, to form that magical worldview, because it's like, to liken it to an analogy of computers, there's different plugins from different thinkers. The foundations are there, but each guy adds a little bit of code to the whole lineage, and that opens up newer and newer things. By the time you work yourself from Egypt into Neoplatonism, you're adding pieces that they're vastly changing the picture of the worldview that we're looking at. And you can start to see it happen as well in reverse, I think, as you start to see that the Middle Ages, we see a reversal into materialism in the way that the structure of the philosophy is presenting itself. And it's vital to understand that if we want to go back to a more expansive, you've got to go as deep as you possibly can in the philosophy. If you're not reading philosophy while you're doing magic, please pick up a philosophy book.
I agree. I agree with that, because I think along with consumerism and materialism, which I would probably say, like in academia right now, the term materialism is obsolete. So the word that I like to use is positivism, right? Scientific positivism, that everything can be explained through some sort of scientific, specifically this material scientific. You got to like bob and weave with academia, because they're basically, once you pull their pants down, they just tie the belt a little tighter. That's it. That's real. So now I got to find a different word to call you on your horse shit. So I'll do it. I'll play your fucking game. I'm going to keep pulling your pants down. That's my job. So it's that kind of thing really is all part of what I call the mind virus of postmodernism. And so that really does come to the fore by way of like the Aristotelian philosophical empirical development that actually reaches its apex, its real strength in the Middle Ages with William of Ockham, who turns that into nominalism, and then from that the various schisms in Christianity, right? Protestantism. Walter Hanegraaff talks a lot about this. He makes a very good point. Protestantism brought us the Enlightenment in a lot of ways, and really changed the paradigm, and essentially it's a religion that is kind of not religious in the traditional sense. So and they take over the universities and start pouring in this very, very, I would say, fundamentalist mentality that has given us positivism, scientific reductionist materialism.
Yes.
So
that's the word I was going to use. It reduces the spirit.
Exactly.
It reduces it produces an imbalance in the human being. Right. It really does.
Makes us insane.
Because it literally has. Like, just look around. It's a wild thing, man. I got to give you kudos for that. I'm gonna have to put. I have so many books in the queue. That's why I haven't picked it up yet. But I'm gonna have to put it in the queue because I need another injection of that. It's like the beginner's mindset. I've read all the histories up to this point and as much books as I can on the matter, but now there's a new one. So I'm a beginner. What's Ike got to teach me this time? What am I missing of the magical worldview? Where can I expand myself? And I'm glad that you had the opportunity to do that because it's so very you. From what I've begun to understand from you, from listening to you in the show, and now through this conversation, it's like any book is a window into a person and their spirit, their soul. And I tend to think, as an author myself, everyone has a book in them. It's a sacred song that needs to be released, and you can't go through your entire life and let that song die. That's something from recovery from my sponsor, who said, "Don't let your song die. You've got a lot to say. Don't let it die, man." And so I'm glad you had that opportunity. Now, there's other things that I want to get to with you. The Hermopolis conference. So tell us a little bit about the Hermopolis conference.
Sure. So it was we were branding it as the new Hermopolis conference a while back, but we've had some changes in administration, and so now it's we're calling it the Hermopolis Symposium, but it's a conference at the New Hermopolis village in Egypt.
Nice.
This is a complex that has been developed and maintained by Dr. Mervat Nasser about 15 years now. We are bringing some of the best. Her and I are the co-founders. We'll also be presenting there. It's going to be 3-day symposium, bringing together some of the luminaries in the academic study of occultism, like Walter Hanegraaff, Shannon Grimes, Aaron Cheek, Dr. Charles Stang from the Center for the Study of World Religions at Harvard. Got really, really top-notch keynote presenters, and then we're also bringing them together in the desert, in seclusion. This is a fairly remote area, with practitioners who practice it and contribute to the tradition at a very high level. So somebody like Soledad Davies, who runs Psicosematica, the only right in the world right now, the only Spanish-speaking academic institute for the study of astrology. which is incredible. She's an amazing astrologer herself. Jamie Paul Lamb, obviously astrological magic, Golden Dawn guy, an astrologer himself. P.D. Newman is going to be there. His work is outstanding, and just a lot of other really, really great people. We're getting them together for 3 days in the desert. There will not be an in-person audience because of how remote it is and how we don't have the space to have people, stay on site. So the Arcanum channel, my channel, is we're going to be streaming digital presenters first over 2 days. So people like Peter Mark Adams, Ronnie Pontiac, Seven Bremner. We're having really, really great high-level presenters who can't be there in person. So I'm going to stream that. And then once we get back from the actual conference, the people who have purchased passes will not only get the digital presenters, but they'll have a streaming link to the proceedings itself. Now, for $90, you will get basically 5 or 6 days worth of, like, arguably some of the highest presentations that are going to be available and this stuff. Dr. Greg Shaw is doing a digital presentation. Mark Vernon is doing a digital presentation. So I'll give you a link so you can put that in the about section. I will. And then the only other thing that really I have going on that's big is at the end of this month, September 27th, 28th, and 29th, I'm going to be giving the keynote presentation at the Esotericism in Freemasonry Conference, which is in its 8th year. It's headed by Brother Troy Sprue at Occidental Lodge in Seattle. Now, Friday night and Saturday are open to the public. Sunday is a Masonic, or I would say invitation-only event, and I'm going to be giving a presentation. I'm going to be giving a workshop on scrying, how to scry, a couple of different methods. P.D. Newman is also going to be giving a workshop on statue animation, Agalma, and Jamie Lamb is going to be giving a Zoom presentation on astrology, and astrological magic. So really, Troy's doing a great job. I'm super excited to get out there and hang out with everybody. I encourage anybody that's in the area to attend, and there is going to be a select sort of digital broadcast as far as I'm aware. You can check that out on esotericmasonry.com.
Awesome. Well, this has been awesome, Ike. Just awesome. And I urge our listeners, what few of you are out there, but seem to be more to come.
Absolutely.
Please check out Ike's Hermopolis conference and all of his awesome work on Arcanum. If you need a podcast that talks about all of this high-level stuff, please go ahead and subscribe. Give him a listen.
Thank you.
And pick up his book as well, because a great many of you out there need it. I can tell. I can just feel it.
Yeah.
Or I'll start messaging them on Instagram. The ancestors are telling me that you need a formless fire.
The last thing that I want to tag on to that is that it was very graciously put out by Tria Prima Press, a Masonic publisher out of Phoenix, Arizona. They are independent. So if you do get the book, please buy it from Tria Prima directly on their website. There's no difference in cost and shipping and timelines and stuff like that. Matter of fact, you might get it quicker. Amazon is for people who are outside of the United States or Canada, I believe, because Amazon really, I don't have to tell you, they're not, all the work that we put in and the hours and months and stuff to create this for you guys, I think, and priced very modestly for a book of its kind and scope. We've seen virtually nothing when you buy from Amazon.
Yeah. And that convenience often is paid back in or at the cost of the author and the publisher, right, more often than not. The convenience of having it in 2 days, it's paid for by someone else in most cases. So do your best to support small businesses and small publishers, as Ike says. So thanks again, buddy. This has been awesome. And I'll have to have you on again, because these kind of conversations are never done, in my opinion. We should just continue to have them as often as possible, because so much comes of it. I tend to take the stance that I learn more from the conversations than I give. And I hope to live that way, in that beginner's mindset, more often than not. Is that I am getting so much more than I'm giving, because the way that the world is at this point, everything is about giving your worldview in that conversation. And so thank you for sharing yours with me.
Yeah.
And
who knows,
sharing that experience.
The next time we talk, who knows what the hell I'm going to have to say, right? Everything's in motion.
Exactly. Exactly. You could be a completely different guy.
I hope not, but hey.
You never know, man. I change so often. I'm only 39, and I can tell you I've lived 3 or 4 different lives at this point. So
I feel you. Thanks for having me on. It's a real pleasure.